that there is a lot of food for thought in contemplating the story of the Spanish Jewish community. Obviously, what I like to do is put everything in historical context, and therefore, what I'll be focusing on here are maps more than anything else. But here we go. Now, when we talk about Spain, of course, we're talking about the Iberian Peninsula, which means it's what you call Spain and Portugal today. They didn't have no such thing as Spain at that time. They didn't have such thing as Portugal. It was just a big peninsula, as you know. And the Spanish Peninsula is very, very good. You got mountains, you got deserts, you got all kinds of different regions in there. And it's not all like everybody's living in one country in exactly the same conditions. Things are very, very different over there. And that's a very important part of our story. Now, as far as the Jews are concerned, Spain, when were there Jews? But who knows? The Spanish Jews used to say that they go back to the First Temple period and before that. Now, that's most likely a legend. It is. Or let's put it this way, we have no records of it. But in the Bayesheni period, Second Temple period, Spain was part of the Roman Empire for many centuries. And there were plenty of Jews living in Spain as Jews lived all over the Roman Empire. This has nothing to do with the story of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and Tisha B'Av and all that. Of course, that happened also, but that happened in Eretz Yisrael. But there were tons of Jews living in places like Egypt, in Italy, in Greece, and what we call today France and Spain and North Africa and places like that. These were a bunch of Jewish communities scattered all over the place. What kind of Judaism they practice is a great question. That's one of the things I hope to explore tonight. Because obviously the Judaism they practiced once upon a time cannot be identical with the Judaism that we practice today simply because the Gemara didn't exist. The definition of being a frum Jew, as they say, nowadays is trying to live your life to the best you can according to the dictates as you understand it of the Talmud Bavli, Babylonian Talmud. There may be disagreements about what the Babylonian Talmud wants you to do, but nevertheless, that's what it is. Maybe you don't realize it, but that's how it goes. Once upon a time, the book didn't exist, but the Jews did. And so, how was Shabbos practiced? Kashrus and all the rest of it. Obviously, the broad lines are clear. No one ever lit a match under Jewish law on a Saturday morning. I always like to say nobody could eat a ham sandwich, but there's a lot of things in between that. And these are issues which call forth our investigation. The Mishnah and the Gemara already. In those times, many will know if they've been in yeshivas, talk about whether a get which comes from a spamia knows about lishma, which is fancy words for saying that when they write marriage documents and divorce documents in Spain, do they know the rules? And the rabbis in Israel were very skeptical about the level of knowledge of Jews in these far-flung provinces long ago. But there were Jews there, and we know very little about them. Right? They were there for hundreds of years. You never know in history when you don't hear anything about anybody. Does that mean things were bad or things were good? Right? The Swiss always say, "Happy is the country whose history is boring." Right? You understand that? But on the other hand, silence covers up many faults. If you read a Russian history book in the time of Stalin, everything's great. So you never know, what the facts are. There is a very powerful tradition among Spanish Jews. Doesn't mean it's true at all. But they were taken captive from the time of destruction of the Beis Hamikdash by the Romans, and carried off to Spain. As far as I know, that's a legend. It's not true at all. But what's really interesting is one of the generals of Titus, who participated in the siege of Jerusalem, destruction of the temple, was the famous Spanish Roman general Trajan, whose son became a very famous Roman emperor, Aelius Trajan. And and Trajan was we're told by Josephus, was very brutal to the Jewish POWs, which means the Spanish were anti-Semites before there was even a Spain. And maybe there's some basis to this notion. But there were Jews in Spain in the 100s, 200s, 300s, and so forth. We don't know anything about them. In the 400s, the 300s and 400s, maybe you remember from high school, the Roman Empire collapsed, which is another way for saying that the German tribes, the barbarians as they used to call them, took over the areas of the Roman Empire. So Spain was taken over by Germans, first by the Vandals and then by the Goths, what they call the Visigoths, the Western Goths. Those people from Germany came and invaded Spain, which is why you'll find in Spain today Spanish people with blonde hair and blue eyes and things like this. Well, and then Rodrigo and Federico. There's a lot of German influence in the deep Spanish culture. Here we start to have some information about the Jews who are living in Spain, because there were, it seems, sizable Jewish communities, although we don't know how many, living in the 300s, 400s, 500s, and 600s. But what do we know about them? Very little. Again, we don't. In Jewish history, we look for scholarship. We look for something like from the Gemara, from the Tanakh. You don't find any of that in Spain. But rather, you find how the non-Jews treated the Jews. And here you have a foreshadowing of events where what happened during these centuries was that as I say, German barbarians took over the Spanish Peninsula and ruled there, and the Roman Empire went into decay and collapse in the West. And yet at the same time, other things were happening as well, major fights within Christianity. When the Roman Empire switched to Christian under Constantine, so it became a big machlokas, what exactly is the definition of Christianity? And lots of groups fought it out, but the two big teams, the Democrats and Republicans, were the ones who followed the Bishop Anastasius and those who followed the Bishop Arius. And they had big debates about the nature of the Yashka and things like this, kind of questions which seem odd to a Jew, to put an understatement, because they really do. You know, did he really have a fingernail? Just was it an illusion of a fingernail? Things like that. But to them it meant a lot. And you can't make fun of somebody else's religion because everybody's religion is a little crazy to someone else. And the point I want to make is that the Goths, the Germans who ruled Spain, were followers of Bishop Arius. The people in Spain, the Hamonam, as we say, were Catholics. They're followers of Bishop Anastasius. That's the Catholic Church today. Okay? So that means that the politics of the Iberian Peninsula was such that you had a ruling class which was strongly hated by the people that they ruled. The masses of peasants and farmers and whatever is in the city and all the rest of it. The nobles, the people, the soldiers, and the people with the power are a different group. So that was good for the Jews. Welcome to the Middle Ages. Wherever the Jews find the situation where there's a certain homogeneity, where everybody's kind of the same, it's very tough to be the only one on the block different. On the other hand, when you find a situation in which there are different groups in society, particularly when they're clashing, so then your main focus is on the other group, which is the enemy. The Jews are a little group on the side. They're not playing any real part in the politics. And so the ruling class in Spain during these centuries, the 400s, the 500s, and so forth, actually were good to the Jews. Right? But they were good to the Jews simply because they saw the Jews as a sort of ally, a non-enemy, in a world in which they're surrounded by people who always look at them with daggers because these machlokas and over the nature of Christianity were so fierce that they led often to violent clashes. But that meant that the Jews are always hanging on a thread, and that is the story of the Jews in Spain for 700 years. That the security is always hanging on a thread. Because sooner or later, in the case of Spain in 587, the ruling class started to become Catholic, like everybody else. And that's a process that took about 100 years, but it happened. And when that happened, then the Jews are the only one on the block. Everybody else is exactly the same. Everybody else has the exact same holidays. They do the exact same way of celebrating the holidays. They do the exact same way of going to Mass and all the other things that are part of Catholicism, except the Jews. That got really tight. And from that time on, from the late 500s on, for the next 100 years or so, from 589 to 712 to be exact, gezeros, one after another, that the kings of Spain, which is what it was, started piling up all these discrimination rules and regulations against the Jews and forcing people to convert and then not allowing them to come back there, which led to a phenomenon of Marranos and things of this nature long before the Muslims even showed up. Okay? And there are church councils. If somebody wants to Google this, you look up the councils of Toledo, where the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th, 12th, and 13th all deal with what do you do with the Jewish problem. That time, before, the beginning of the Middle Ages. And things got worse and worse. And the result is by the time you get to the late 600s, Jews are being kicked out of the country or killed very often, and if they won't convert, then their children are taken away from them and raised by people who are not Jewish in monasteries and all kind of places like that. And the church said this is 100% okay. And it got to a point where they wouldn't even say, we'll let you live here if you pay double, triple, quadruple taxes. They want to kill them or force them to convert. And so it got really, really, really tough, and by the time you get to the year 700 or so, the situation for the Jews in Spain was worse than bleak. Okay. Now, on the other hand, time doesn't stand still, and things are happening outside of that area, namely in the rest of the world. What's happening in the 600s? Well, in the early 600s, Muhammad rose up and took over all of Saudi Arabia, what we call today the Arabian Peninsula. Then when he died in 632, and within 20 years, his followers conquered a ganze Welt. Right? They went and, I'll tell you exactly, because here the chronology makes a difference. Within a few years, they took over the Persian Empire, which means you have Saudi Arabia and Yemen and all that, plus Iran and Iraq and Pakistan, Afghanistan, you're talking about a lot of area. Then, also within a year or two, they took over the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire, which is Syria and Israel and Jordan, and what else is left in Lebanon? And then in 640, within 8 years after Muhammad died, they took over Egypt. You see? So it was expanding like crazy. Like crazy. Now, we'll come later on to the question of the Arabs and culture, but I can tell you right now, when the Arabs took over Egypt, a very famous thing happened. They went to the Alexandria, was a gigantic city with thousands of libraries and thousands of churches. And they still had at that time the famous library of Ptolemy II, which you remember is the reason he wanted the Jews to translate the Bible into Greek, the Septuagint. He wanted to have a copy of every book. And you can just imagine what kind of literary treasures this place had, which was around for many, many centuries as a temple of learning. And when the Arabs came, they burned it down. Because Amr, the first general, is famous. He said, what should we do with the library? He says, all the knowledge in the world that's necessary for any human being is contained in this book, the Quran. So the rest of it is a waste of time, so burn it down. Now, 30, 40 years later, they realized they made a mistake, but it's too late. Which is why today we don't have most of what the Greeks and the Romans wrote. We think we know what Aristotle said and these guys, but you only know fragments of what they had. Anyway, at that point, the Arabs started to fight among themselves. Now, this is a basic situation and basic feature of Arab history. It's a cycle that comes and goes all the time. In our own lifetime, we've seen it. They're always fighting. The question is, are they fighting others or are they fighting themselves? It's interesting. This is the nature of the Islamic dynamic from day one. And indeed, the cycles have been, look at the Middle East in our own time. From time to time they fight others. I'll give you an example, Israel, and then other times they attack each other. If you take the trouble to look how many times this Arab country fought this Arab country, maybe even at this minute, there's plenty, but the world doesn't pay attention. They only pay attention if something happens in Israel. Okay? Now, having said that, that's what happened at that time. In the late 640s and 650s, they started tearing each other up to pieces. And the big argument over there, all this is being nogea to what we're saying. Big argument there is who should be the leader of the Arabs. Should it be A or B, the Democrats or the Republicans? Should it be Ali, who was a nephew and a beloved relative of Muhammad, or someone else? Okay? And Ali got in there, and then the other guys went after him and killed him. Right? And from this breaks up the Arabs till today between the Sunnis and the Shiites. If you think it's a dead issue, go to Iraq. I tell you, if somebody stubs their toe in Israel, it's all over the front page of the news. If the Shiites blow up 10,000 Sunnis or vice versa, which happens every day, every week in Iraq, you hear it on the news and nobody pays any attention. It's a funny world we live in. But these issues, which seem to us to be a minor piece of history, are a big deal to all the Muslims down till today. And so what's really interesting is that, not that you should know the Quran, but in the Quran, it said Muhammad had this big opponent named Abu Sufyan. He fought him, and a lot of times there were very bitter struggles. In the end, the guy was overwhelmed by Muhammad's army and influence, and he sort of converted b'di'evet, as they say. And he was an aristocrat. He joined the Muslims. Well, his son killed Ali and took over and became the caliph, the head of the whole Arab world, and founded a dynasty for about 100 years called the Umayyad dynasty out of Damascus. And they killed out all the Ali-type guys, which means if you're a Shiite, everything I just says is make your blood boil right now. You want to go kill somebody just from hearing this. And it meant that there's going to be big consequences for Spain. Now how? Well, after what I just said happened, they killed everybody. The only guy left standing, like the end of Hamlet, the only guy left standing was this al-Muawiyah, who became the caliph, and then his son after him, and so forth. So the Arabs had this huge empire, but they wanted to expand it even more. So they did do so. In the 660s and down to the year 700, they fought a whole bunch of wars and conquered the rest of North Africa, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. What we call today Libya and Tunisia and Algeria and Morocco, they're not Arabs. They were conquered by the Arabs. If they had I'm still waiting for the day one day where they wake up and realize that. You understand? They really should be they should be the friends of Israel. You get what I'm saying? They were attacked by the Saudi Arabians long ago, but that's not how they see it. That's not how they see it. And they took all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. I might say they also tried to take over the Byzantine Empire, take Constantinople, and there were huge wars. They were fighting a whole wars. But for our purpose, by the time you get to around 700 or so, the Arabs got all of North Africa, which brings you right near Spain. I don't know if you see the map here. Okay, give me the last map or something for a second. The one after that. Yeah, okay, you look at the bottom. Look how close Africa is that's called the Straits of Gibraltar. I mean, you can really see, if you stand there, you can see the other side. They do it as Tangiers. Okay? So you understand what I'm saying? Okay? That's why the British, for example, have always wanted to hold on to Gibraltar, and they do it till today, because it's extremely important. And I might say that Gibraltar it was the only place in Spain for many hundreds of years since 1492, or since 1702, where Jews are allowed to be, because under the British, not under the Spanish. There's no Inquisition. And that's why Gibraltar still has a Orthodox Jewish community down till today. So when people go on tours of Spain and things like this, you always arrange to have Shabbos in Gibraltar, because there's a shul and there's kosher food and all the rest of it. Okay, now, if the Arabs are all that close, then you see how it's going to affect Spain. Because they're not going to stop when they get to the ocean. They're going to try to go up north into Europe. And why not? It's very close. This is what happened. They tried to do it on the other side of Europe, and they were blocked over there, but this side of Europe, they managed to do it. Now, at this point, when you get to around the year 7 or so, the Jews are being horribly persecuted, as I just described before, tortured to death, their children being kidnapped, as I said before, brought up against their will as Christians in monasteries and other sorts of institutions of coercion. It was really, really rough. Not only them, any followers left of Bishop Arius, they were also being persecuted. One nobleman was fighting another nobleman. What I'm trying to say is that a major feature of Spanish history, especially in those times, was disunity and machlokes, one group fighting the other group. And whenever you have one group fighting the other group, they always they call for help from some outside source. You understand what I'm saying? If I'm fighting you, I call for help from abroad. I'm saying all this because all this is going to be very, very important throughout the Middle Ages, but it will produce, as human events do, a counter-reaction in favor of an extreme unity. You follow? If you say all of our life we've been suffering from fights among and differences between ourselves, then you're going to hear in the end that there's going to be a counter-dynamic that we want everybody to be exactly the same and no more fights, and that's going to be very bad for the Jews. And eventually it's going to lead to their expulsion from Spain, because they want everybody to be exactly the same. But that's way down the line. At the time I'm talking about, therefore, the different Christian groups fighting each other were so bitter that in 712 they invited the Arabs to come and help one side over the other. Well, you know what happened? The Arabs came, helped one side, and they took over the whole thing. The Arab general Tariq, which is why he called Gibraltar is Jebel al-Tariq, the mountain of Tariq, he landed with a small army in 712. The following year, on a successful raid, the following year, Musa Nasir, now you have to remember these guys, landed, made a real sustained campaign, and within a very short time, as you see over here, they overran the Iberian Peninsula. It's really remarkable. In 2 years, something like that. There was a large, flourishing kingdom, but it had a lot of problems. And one of the problems was it had a lot of dissatisfied minorities, and the dissatisfied minorities helped one of the Arabs come in. Because they'll do better under the Arabs than they'll do under the Christians. One group was the Jews. So all the chroniclers of that time, the Christians as well as the Muslims, all say that when the Arabs invaded Spain, one of the reasons they won was because every time they get into big fortified cities, the Jews opened the door for them. Okay? But listen, would I owe loyalty to somebody who's trying to who stole my kids? You know what I'm saying? I owe loyalty to somebody who wants to burn me? Heck with that. I'll bring in the air. So that's what happened. So the Jews were an important element in the Arab conquest of Spain, which happened really quickly in the early 700s, as I say before. Now, what happened now was very interesting. This map is very important because it shows you one very important feature, and that is the Arabs took over all that stuff up to the Asturias at the top. You see that, right? Which means they took over and overran Spain, which was a Christian country, but was conquered by Muslims in these rapid campaigns. Almost all of Spain, but as you see, they didn't take over a very, very top part. At the very end, the Christians held the line literally with their backs to the sea. And the Arabs never did succeed in conquering that area called the Asturias, which is very important, because it's like a cancer. You say either you get them or you don't. I can tell you right now, what happened was from there, eventually the Christians made a counterattack, and little by little, over 700 years, actually 800 years, they took everything back. It's called the Reconquista, the Reconquest. But it's due to the fact that they left pockets in there, very similar to the Jewish history. When the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, God, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jews, don't leave any of these pockets, chase them all out. Get rid of them. But the Jews didn't listen to that. And the result was it came to bite them. In 1948, notoriously, they're going to set up a state. The Arabs said, we're going to drive into the sea. The Jews did not drive the Arabs into the sea. They didn't drive them out of the country, as we know. Ben Gurion and the leaders of Israel had their reasons. They certainly did. On the other hand, it's a terrible error. You understand? So it's very interesting that the Arabs did the exact same thing back in the early 700s. Okay? But for the beginning, they figured it doesn't matter, because if you look over on the right side, you see it sticks over into what they call Narbona over there. So that means that they actually invaded France. So they figure, they'll take over France, Germany, and all the others, and that'll be a little piece that'll fall Mamela. You understand what I'm saying? Why bother with it? That was the cheshbon of the Arabs. And they weren't totally wrong. At least they didn't think they were, because they had a very good chance of knocking out France, as we call it today. At that time, the Kingdom of the Franks. We call it France, because German is Frankreich, the Kingdom of the Franks. And the Franks were the other barbarian people ruling, what you and I call France today. And they won a couple of battles, the Arabs, and they went up the Loire Valley. No, they're on their way to Paris. And they had good armies too, as you can obviously tell. But in 732, we all remember from high school, it's one of those dates they make you remember, the Franks, under Charles Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne, defeated him in the Battle of Tours and drove him back. And once that happened, it was clear that the Franks are going to get stronger and stronger, and the Muslims are not going to be able to beat them. It's going to be like we had in the Cold War. You meet a situation of force with a corresponding situation of countervailing force. And that is what happened. And so within a few years, the Arabs were out of France and beyond the Pyrenees, and it was clear that they were not going to be able to invade France. Okay? Which then meant that they lost the momentum of the sustained international offensive, and then the initiative was going to go to the other side, which it did. So within a few years, you're going to see the Asturias and these areas, the Christian areas, become a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and that's how it went on for 800 years. Always got a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. You see? So these dynamics are, sweeping. Okay? Now, by the way, from the point of view of the Muslims, if you want to understand people like Osama bin Laden, they say that was a bump on the road. We're going to pick up where we left off. As far as he's concerned, history should pick up the day after the Battle of Tours, which is now. That's how they think, that. They do want to take over the world. All this happened long ago. That was a recess, a hafsakah, and now we resume. And I got news for you. They're doing a very good job of taking over France and Germany and Italy and these other countries right now. We can laugh all we want, but as we all know, it is a nervous laughter, isn't it? It's a nervous laughter. Now, I don't even go to Europe so much, but there are people here who do, I can tell you. Now, but that's the mentality they have. But for our story, you see a number of things. The Arabs take over Spain. It's all in the context of wars. There's a lot of issues of Muslims versus Christians. And what we interested, how does it affect the Yidden? How does it affect the Jews? Well, it means that Spain is going to be, or the Spanish Peninsula, is going to be different than the rest of Europe. Because the rest of Europe was Christian ruled and remained that way throughout the Middle Ages. On the other hand, Spain was the only part of Europe in the Middle Ages which is ruled by the Muslims. But furthermore, this is a big area. Look at that map. It's big. Had a lot of Christians in there, a lot of non-Muslims. Spain was different than the other areas ruled by the Arabs. And it was different in the fact that it had large minorities, very large minorities, maybe a majority, who knows, that was not Arab and not Muslim even. Okay? I'll say it again. They were not Arab and not Muslim. Now, when the Arabs came in, they had a system already. They worked out in Muhammad's time and afterwards, which is they take over a country, and everybody's not a Jew or Christian has to convert to Islam or get killed. But if you are a Jew or Christian, then they do like this. If you pay 60% or so, 65% of your money in taxes, what they call the jizya, the hen tax, poll tax, if you pay that, then you are not uppity. You know your place. Then you are left alone to run your own religious affairs, and you have freedom of religion. But if there's any sign of not paying the taxes, or any sign, even if you pay the taxes, of being uppity, then we can kill you. See? That's how it goes. And that's certainly the way it was in Spain and everywhere else, where the Arabs ruled, and that's how it is down till today. If anything, it's moved to the right within Islamic terms, because these new radical Islamic areas, they don't even want to do that. As you know, the Taliban, they don't want this toleration for 60% of taxes. They just say, convert or we'll kill you. But that's how it was in the Middle Ages at this particular time. So for the different Christian groups in there, a lot of them converted to Islam because of the money. That makes sense, right? If you're a Muslim, you pay almost no taxes. If you're a Christian, you pay a lot of taxes. What can I tell you? Some people operate that way. Lots of people do. And they're called Muzarabs. There was a whole group of people who were Spanish and who Arabized and Islamized as part of the regime. You see? But there are also others who, a lot of others, who remain Christian. But they were Arabized. Because, and I mentioned this in the past, one of the things the Arabs did was conquer all this area. But a second thing they did was Arabize it and Islamize it. By that I mean they imposed the Arab culture everywhere, and they imposed the Islamic religion. But they imposed the Arab culture more than they imposed the Islamic religion. That's what I told you before. I wish they would wake up, and the Moroccans and the Tunisians and the Egyptians, for crying out loud, are not Arabs. Right? Let's put it this way. There was pharaohs before Arabia was anything, before Yishmael was born. Isn't that true? There were pharaohs long ago. The Egyptians ought to have a feeling that we have a culture which is maybe the oldest in the world, and very great, and the hieroglyphics and the pyramids and the pharaonic Egypt, and we should be importing our culture to everywhere else. We shouldn't be having the language and the culture of these nomads from Arabia, but that's not what happened. See? So it's true across the board. Iraq once was called Bavel. Bavel, you want to be really technical, Sumeria, Acadia, these were flourishing civilizations and cultures before the time of Avraham Avinu. That's where he was born. Long before Arabia was anything. And yet they consider themselves Arabs. So the Arabs succeeded in a grand rape, the likes of which have never been seen in history. I say that advisedly. They were able to impose not only they physically conquered these people, but they, first of all, they did a lot of it by rape. They just raised a ton of children that way. And second of all, they did it through force and violence. And that's how it goes. If you go in the Arab culture even today, the Islamic culture I'm talking about, you will become like them. It's an overwhelming, they will make you do it. And this is what happened across the world, from Pakistan on the one hand to Spain on the other. A huge area. So they did impose the Arabic culture everywhere, and they also imposed the Islamic religion, but less so. Because as I told you, if you were Christian or Jewish, they didn't make you convert. But the people who lived in this empire, which lasted for many, many centuries, is there even till today, sooner or later, it didn't take too long, Arabized. So pretty soon, Jews, it takes a generation, 2 or 3 or 4, the Jews are all talking Arabic of one kind or another. It's with an accent and with special jargon and dialect. It might be, to a real Arab, it might look like Jamaican English or something like that. I'm serious. But it's Arabic, you see, which is really interesting. It's the language of the conquerors, but they were very successful in doing just that. You don't need me to tell you that the Rambam, all the other people, as we'll see, spoke in Arabic, wrote in Arabic. Who knows what they thought in? Like we do in English. There's a class being given right now in the English language, I hate to tell you. Even though it's a Jewish subject, why don't we talk to Ivrit? Hello, Doverhu. And so these sweeping issues, dominate the reality of these centuries. And the result is that the Jews Arabized and the Christians did as well. But the Christians are the main ones I'm focusing on. Everybody in Spain, therefore, except the top part, is going to be speaking Arabic. But can you trust them? The Christians hate the Muslims. The Muslims hate the Christians. Now, I'm not finished. The Muslims are composed of 2 teams, A and B. The Arabs and the new Arabs, the Berbers. The Arabs are the ones that came out of Arabia, or their children or their grandchildren, and were the children and grandchildren of the people from Muhammad's time, the ones who conquered the whole area. And Tariq, for example, these other guys were Arabs, and they are so proud of their yichud, it's unbelievable. The Quran is the holy book to them, and a lot of names of these tribes are in the Quran, so therefore you could say, I'm related to this one and that one and the other. In their culture, it's really a huge yichud thing. Now, the Berbers were the peoples that were conquered and Islamized shortly before. The peoples who lived in Algeria and Morocco and these kind of places, their Arabic isn't as obviously native as the ones that are real Arabs. They're always going to speak with a funny accent. They're never really going to understand Arab stuff deep, deep, deep down. The Arabs look at them as riffraff. And there's no political correctness in the Arabs at this time. If I consider you riffraff, every time I say, come here, riffraff. You know what I mean? Hey, well, get me a drink. So there's huge animosity among the conquerors. So look what I'm talking about. It's a cauldron. You got the new area of Spain, or as the Arabs are going to call it, Andalusia, Andalus. And it's ruled by a thin layer of Arab aristocrats and generals and big machers on the other hand. Underneath them are a bunch of Berber soldiers who, are allied with them against everybody else, but hate their bosses. It's the type of thing every once in a while they poison or murder their Arab chief. You see? All the Berber sergeants and lieutenants are dreaming of being captains and generals and taking over for themselves. Let alone this, the Arab groups themselves are not united, because as I told you before, the Arabs are always fighting each other, unless they're fighting others. So once they conquered Spain, they went into major fights among each others. Then you got the Christian groups in there, you got the converts who converted to Islam from Christianity, but who knows if they really mean it. You've got the makings of right? You see what I'm saying? Of a cooking pot. And then you got the Jews. Right? The point I'm trying to get at is a fundamental feature of the next several centuries in Spain is you don't have to worry about the Jews. Isn't that right? If you're a ruler somewhere, you got to worry about your Berbers, your Arabs, your this, that, and the other. You're not going to worry about the Jews. What are they going to do? They're not going to set up an independent state. What are they into? All the Jews want, in Middle Ages, all the Jews want just about anywhere in the Galut is one thing. It's the law and order. You know what I'm saying? All they want is law and order. Because when there's no law and order, who gets it first? You see? So they just want, now forget democracy in the Middle Ages. They want a strong person over there who will be able to make sure that there's not a crime. Get it? There's liberty of property. And I always like to quote King Darius of Persia, who lived before this, who left on his famous monument over there. He says, I am Darius, king of kings, and ruled over so and so many provinces. And when I was king, a virgin with a sack of gold could travel in the middle of the night on any road. His point being like this: we had crime control big time. Now maybe they killed 10,000 extra people, but but you could walk on the street. Listen, can we make that claim about Baltimore, Maryland, right now in the year 2009? I won't say any more. Now, so the Jews are not the problem ever. As a result, there's no political pressure on any of these groups to keep Jews out, not on one group of Muslims or the others. As a matter of fact, the opposite. The Jews come in, they make money, they contribute taxes. 60% is 60%. If this Jew makes, matzlich in business, good. You follow? And so the result is that there was a huge immigration of Jews from all over the world to Spain, because it's a place where there's parnasa, there's business. This peninsula, though you can't tell from this kind of map, obviously, is chock full of natural resources, agriculture in amazing ways. They have minerals. They have huge forests. Spain is incredibly rich, if it's done right, an incredibly rich kind of peninsula. They have huge rivers cutting through all over the place. The Douro, the Ebro, the Guadalquivir, all these different rivers, which create river valleys, and they're natural things for commerce and boats to go in and out. You can do a lot if you put in the hands of the right businessman. You can make a lot in Spain. Well, Jews in the Middle Ages, like everybody, is always desperate to make money. Remember, there's no social security, no unemployment insurance, none of that safety and that kind of stuff. So you always got to make a living. So tons of Jews moved to Spain. These are the Sephardim. You get it? The main majority of Jews, as far as I'm aware. Now, I wasn't there in the Roman times, who knows? But as far as I can tell, the vast majority of the Jews of Spain, will be now and afterwards, are Jews who immigrate to Spain after the early 700s, after the Arab conquest, because with all the junk going on over there, somebody with a little bit of initiative, there's an economy in which you can make money. You know what I'm saying? And that is what the Jews do. And for a couple hundred years, the Hebrews were so busy fighting everybody else, they really were, that nobody had time to worry about the Jews who are not in anybody's way. You understand what I'm saying? There will be major wars between one group of Arabs and another. I'm not going to sit here and bore you with all the names of this emir fights that one, and this city went to war with that one. But that is how Spanish history goes. And then the Berbers, as I said before, versus the Arabs. and then every once in a while, like in the 800s, the Christians rise, and they try to show their heads up, and the Arabs suppress them, and then some of the Christians who converted Islam go back, like the Emir's guards, and then they were massacred. There's all kind of things going on over there, but the Jews are not the issue. The only time we have any records of Jews being involved in these areas was when a Jew was stupid enough to get involved in these political quarrels. You know what I'm saying? You have cases, particularly Jewish moneylenders, so the guy gets very invested that this Arab should succeed or this Berber, and this is not who you want to invest with. But he sees it not that way. He says, this guy could rise to the top and take me with him. And that happens once in a while. But, when you go in the fast lane, right? You go in the fast lane, be prepared for all kinds of things. And so this is what I'm trying to show you is that Spain became a huge Jewish area and a large center, not because there was a multicultural ethic and because people believed in tolerance, and there was a golden age because people said, let's let the similarities outweigh the differences. Nothing like that existed, although I'm certainly not finished with the story. But rather because of the facts on the ground and the fact that Spain was very different than the other provinces. In other areas, for example, in Egypt and the Middle East, you don't need me to tell you, the Christian minorities are very small, and anytime they get large, the Arabs make pogroms on them. But down till today, and either kick them out or force them to become Muslim. This couldn't be done, apparently, in Spain so well. And so the Arab hold on Spain was always somewhat tenuous. I don't want to overplay it because the Arabs were very strong, but it was always somewhat tenuous, and you know that it's not Saudi Arabia. You see? It's not Saudi Arabia. Believe you me, I'm sure the Arabs today are kicking themselves and saying we should have made every Christian. How do we get so dumb and let this happen? But they did. Okay? And they spent most of the time fighting each other. So, we have a place in which Jews, it's like Baltimore, new families are moving to Spain all the time, all through the 700s and the 800s, and even after that. What do we know about these Jews? Very little. We know something, and that is that they seem to have been frum Jews, as we say, religious Jews, but they didn't know anything. Big Amaratza. But that's not surprising, because here again, we come to a fundamental feature of this particular period. I mentioned before about the Gemara and the Talmud Bavli. The Talmudization of Jewry takes place in the 5, 6, and 700s. Think about what I said. Once upon a time, a book called the Talmud Bavli, the Gemara that you and I use today, you ask me, what's the halacha on Shabbos? You get it from halacha books, but the halacha books are supposed to get it from the Gemara. They better be able to do that, unless you have a minhag or something like that. And so, once upon a time, this book didn't exist. So, how did Jews around the world practice Judaism? Not necessarily, in fact, almost certainly, not in precise conformity with the minutiae and rules and regulations that one finds in the Talmud, particularly when you have a Talmudic discussion between this group, and after discussing it, they kind of come out to some kind of a conclusion. I mean, everything I just said is for scholars. Who's the average person? Who knows this sort of thing? There was no diffusion of books at those days. They were very rare. There was no such thing as commentaries in the Gemara. The art scroll and all this didn't exist, of course. There weren't anything to help you. So what did people do? What I'm trying to show you is, yes, people practice Shabbos and Kashrus and Taras Mishpacha, but not necessarily, in fact, very often not, in the way you and I do today. Because what we do reflects the consensus of the Gemara, which, as you see, once it came out and kind of diffused, brought a uniformitization to Jews around the world. After this process of the spread of the Talmud, and we don't know how it happened, but it happened, Jews living in Spain on the one hand and in Pakistan on the other pretty much kept the same thing we still do now until today. I know there are differences between the Sephardim and Ashkenaz, but they're not significant differences. You see, me, myself, and I could walk in any shul in the world, if it's an Orthodox shul of one kind or another, and I don't care whether it's the Yemenite or another. If it's a Saturday morning, I know the parsha they're going to read this week. I know what the Shema is going to be, and I know they'll have a little bit different here and a little bit different there, but fundamentally it's the same. And even the kosher rules, there's a few differences, but fundamentally it's the same. And so therefore a Jew, once the uniformitization took place, a Jew from anywhere could go to any other groups of Jews anywhere and be fundamentally in the same kind. That's a very powerful force for keeping united groups which have no country, which have no political power, which have no way of coercion of keeping them all on the same page. How do you do that? It can only be done by consensus. How did that consensus form? It can only be done if they had something to rally around. This is how Jews survived. Otherwise, the Jews over here would have spun off in their direction, Jews that would have spun in their direction. You want an example I want to talk about? Look at the Ethiopian Jews, who are not part of this loop. I'm assuming that they're Jewish, but let's do that for the argument's sake. You know, the Jews from Ethiopia, they missed all this, and their religion is just very, very different. You see? Now that they're in Israel, they're trying to learn it the other way. But, no, it's our way. But if you go by the original Ethiopian thing, it's like very far removed. It's really a different religion. As opposed to the other Jews elsewhere, I mean, here's Ethiopia, right off the water, over the water is Yemen. Yemen's a different story altogether. I could walk into a Yemenite shul. I'm sure many people here, one time or another, have been in a Yemenite shul or other kind of institution. And, like I say, the accent's all different, the customs are a little bit different, but Shabbos is Shabbos, and kosher is kosher, and Pesach is Pesach, and Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Hashanah. It is what it is. So the process I'm talking about of uniformitization didn't happen overnight. As a matter of fact, I would like to be a fly on the wall and see all the fights that took place, because you can just imagine coming to a community back in the 600s or the 700s and saying, can't do this on Shabbos. Saying, can't do this on Shabbos. I always did. My father always did. My grandfather always did. He was very religious, Can't do it anymore. Who says that? These group of rabbis in Babylon. Well, what do they know? You can't tell me I live here in Italy or Spain or something like that. But it happened. In other words, somehow or other it happened, but nobody writes about it. That's the trouble. Okay? Let me put it this way. In the Gemara, very often you'll have a debate. This rabbi says, you're allowed to do this on Shabbos, and that one says, you're not. Well, those are not just theoretical debates. It means that there was one group of Jews that did this on Saturdays, and other groups of Jews that did not. By the time the whole Talmudization comes out, by the time this process plays itself out, everybody agrees you can do it, or everybody agrees you can't, whatever the case is. You see? So this issue of uniformity and non-uniformity is very, very powerful and important in what we're discussing over here. Now, we know that the Jews of Spain wanted to get with the program, but they didn't know exactly how. And the reason we know that is because of what they call the Chuvas HaGaonim, which means the letters that were written all the time to the leading Talmudic rabbis in Baghdad. Because in the Arab Empire, the two big yeshivas in Babylonia, where the Gemara was made, Surah and Pumbedisa, relocated to Baghdad. It's like we have today, for example. The Mir Yeshiva is not in a town called Mir. It's in New York, in Jerusalem. Panovich is not in a town in Lithuania. It's in Bnei Brak. Huh? The Ger Rebbe doesn't live in Ger. You see? Same thing at that time. The yeshivas relocated to Baghdad, because Baghdad is right in Iraq, not far from where Surah and Pumbedisa were. And Baghdad is the international city. It's like New York. It's where the banking was. It's where the government's contracts were. That's where all the Jews congregated, because that's where the money was. So the yeshiva is located to be near the people who could support them and give them money. So I would say a very large percentage, maybe majority, but a very large percentage of what we call the Shalosh Chuvas HaGaonim, the letters that were sent to the Gaonim in Babylonia in the 7, 8, 9, and 900s, over a period of 300 years, come from Spain. Right? Not from Egypt, and not, from all the way over on the other side of the world. And they ask questions like, how do you daven? The siddur that you and I use is called Seder Rav Amram Gaon, which means that a bunch of Jews in Spain wrote to me and said, we have fights over here. How are you supposed to daven? Tell us, how do you daven on Shabbos morning? Do you do brachas first? Does the Shema come first? What you and I take for granted, once upon a time, wasn't taken for granted. Why from Spain, 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 Spain? Yeshiva here is a new community. It's like America was 100 years ago. It's a Hefkerwelt in terms of Yiddishkeit. And people want to do the right thing, but there's nobody in Spain, or it doesn't seem that way anyway, that knows anything deeply about the Gemara. And they're writing to the experts far away. And this condition lasts for a long time. One last piece of the puzzle, and that is that the Arabs spent the 700s and the 800s fighting each other like crazy. Civil wars galore. In the midst of all that, they set up their own dynasty. Spain became a separate state, a separate country. And the reason is, because I left you, if you remember back before, where one Arab group killed the other Arab group. Well, like in these movies, eventually the friends and survivors of the Arab group that got killed out the killers. So in other words, the Umayyad dynasty was liquidated and killed out in the 700s by the Abbasid dynasty, who were Shiite Muslims. They were friends of Ali. That's what Shia Islam is all about. And they wanted revenge, and they plotted for 100 years, and they got it. That's who you're dealing with. And they killed out every member of the Umayyad family except one, who, like in a movie or misses, he got away. He ran away from Baghdad to Saudi Arabia, and then to Egypt, and here. Eventually, he ran away, made it to Spain. He was always 2 days ahead of the pursuers. And there were times, I mean, it's a whole story, you know, there were times when he was in a village and was surrounded, somehow he got out. This guy was named Abdurrahman. And when he ran away to Spain, he said, let's break off from everybody else and make our own kingdom. Now, they listened to him. Why did they listen to him? His father was Arab. He was the son or nephew of the previous caliph, you know, from a very royal family. His mother was a Berber slave girl. In the Arab culture, being a son of a slave girl don't mean nothing, because all the women are slaves, you know. So, mother was a Berber slave girl. That means that the two groups that rule Spain and fight each other, his mother's from one, his father's from the other. He was a uniting figure. And they did listen to him, and he became the king, the emir, in Cordoba, in the city of Cordoba in Spain, and made it his own kingdom. And there was a respite for a while in the fights, although after he died they resumed. But he founded the Umayyad dynasty of Cordoba, which means that Spain was no longer part of the Arab Empire, but went in business for itself, so to speak. His great-great-great-grandson is where Jewish history in Spain really begins. His grandson was Abdurrahman III, who was a very famous figure. He ruled for 50 years in Spain, and he was lucky enough to come into power when he was like 17 years old, so he had a long life. And he said like this, I'm going to put an end to all the fighting among the Arabs. We should unite and then fight the Christians. And so he did do this. It took him a long time. But one after another, he went after one rebel town after another, and he conquered it. Until by the time he was like 30, something like that, 30-something, he had taken over all the Arab territories and then united it for the first time in a real state. Now, I told you before, Spain is incredibly rich. If a guy knows what he's doing, he can make a mint. That's exactly what this guy did. Once he had everybody on the same page, even though he had to kill a lot of people to do it, once he had everybody on the same page, so he could turn Spain into a gold mine. They had plenty of gold mines. And that is exactly what he did. He ruled from 912 to 961. So, a long time. And what Abdurrahman III did was build himself up so much that he had 3 times what he needed to run the government. You understand? The money that came in the government, imagine if America was like this. You know, we're talking about, triple the necessary revenue. So they all say 1/3 of the revenue he did for running the government and the army and all that, and the wars, which were constant, fighting the Christians. 1/3 he stashed away in the basement, cash reserve. You see, I mean, this guy had zillions of gold coins, zillions and zillions of gold coins. So what do you do with the third? That he could spend on classy things, on art and science and literature, build himself up into not only a powerful country, but a classy country. And that's what he certainly did. And so Abdurrahman III, Spain became the foremost country in the world. He basically said, anybody who's an artist, a poet, a writer, an astronomer, a mathematician, a theology guy, whatever, anybody like that, you come over here, and if you're any good, I'll give you $100,000 a year, for tax-free, on government thing. The idea is like this: if you're getting $100,000 for somebody for doing nothing, then if you write a poem, what's the title of the poem going to be? Right? If you're writing right, if you're going to be an architect, what kind of building are you going to build? He wasn't a fool, you get it? But it worked. He sucked in through this largesse, which was annual, the best and the brightest from all over the Arab world, year after year, in the 900s, and they made Spain, especially Cordoba, the most built-up country in the world. Cordoba, the capital city, became a city of 500,000, which is unbelievable by medieval standards, because just think, you're going to laugh when I'm saying, just think what it does to run the bathrooms, to run the place, which was a major engineering feat. And they had, I'm not going to read you figures, something, you won't believe this, but it's really true. They had something like 900 universities. You understand? They had bathhouses, palaces, schools, street lighting, public thoroughfares. And on top of that, he built himself a super-duper Versailles luxury palace, which if you go to Spain today, they still have the remnants of, and it's unbelievably amazing, called Medina al-Zahara, the fortress of beauty, the city of beauty. In other words, he lived high, high, high. At the same time, he fought all these wars against the Christians, but nevertheless he built high. And he even proclaimed himself not just the king of Cordoba, the emir, but even the caliph of Cordoba, which means he's the leader of the Arab world. Because after all, his grandfather was from the Umayyads, way back when they were big shots, and therefore he has the right to do this. So this guy lived in a splendid fashion, and he made the patronage of art in. So there's an old expression, that's whatever the gun do, the Jews pick up. So for some reason or other, once the caliph made it a thing that he's interested in he don't want to have a party with a bunch of drunkards. He wants to have a party in which you have a banquet where you sit next to, here's a philosopher, here's a mathematician, here's a scientist, here's the other. You talk high-class talk. So all the other rich guys in the Arab kingdom, they knew if they want to get in good with the government, you better start learning your philosophy and start patronizing people also, otherwise the caliph will consider you just a yutz. Once they do it, then the Jews say, we better start doing the same thing. You get it? It's not for nothing that the Jewish Renaissance commences in the reign of Abdurrahman III, the very long reign of Abdurrahman III. Now, to give you an idea of how classy he was, he left a very famous, he arranged for this, he left a very famous monument, he designed his own tombstone, And what it says over there is, I have now reigned about 50 years in victory and peace. He wrote this when he was older. Riches and honors, power and pleasures have waited on my call. Nor does any earthly blessing appear to have been wanting to my felicity. I conquered everybody I wanted, I beat it, I had revenge everybody I wanted, I lived it up, I was richer than anybody, I had everything, I had olam haza, as they say. In this situation, I have diligently numbered the days of pure and genuine happiness which have fallen to my lot. So here he does a Shlomo Melech and Koheles. When all is said and done, after you've had everything, so, the old question, is money the thing, or is happiness the thing? Many people spend their life in pursuit of money, but they don't get the happiness. So then who won? So I've asked myself, in my vast career of brilliant success, how many days of happiness have fallen to my lot? They amount to 14. Oh man, place not thy confidence in this present world. Which sounds like something from Yisrael Salanta or whatever. But the point is like this. Here you have a classy individual. You understand? Now here you have somebody who's not your typical Arab potentate. You want to know what the typical Arab potentates did? The Emir of Egypt, Maria, who lived in 884, transmuted his incredible wealth into luxury. He walled his palace in Cairo with gold, and he taxed his people to provide himself with a swimming pool made out of quicksilver, on which his bed of inflated leather cushions might gently float so he could go to sleep easier. So here you have your two, you can juxtapose, Al-Qamariya on the one hand, Abdurrahman III on the other. Well, the Jews in Spain, that's why there's no such thing as the golden age of the Jews in Egypt. The gold that was used in Egypt was used to that's a nouveau riche. You want to, think about that. Gold-plated walls in your palace. Is that classy? Anyway, so I don't want to give any ideas, not a bar park, so don't tell anybody I said this. The fact of the matter is that the Jews, therefore, found themselves in the 900s in a united country under an intelligent ruler who was interested, obviously, in power and wealth and armies and that sort of thing. And he was no tzaddik. He had a female harem, he had a male harem. He was a real Arab ruler. That's what these guys were. That's how it went in those days. But and again, this has nothing to do with the Michael Jackson thing. The fact of the matter is that he set a standard, and the Jews wanted to do it too. Now, the leader of this was his doctor, because like many rulers in the Middle Ages, you want a good doctor, you get a Jew. It sounds funny, but it's really true. They had this reputation in the Middle Ages. The Muslim doctors are okay, but you want a good, you want a specialist. You want to get you want to get a Jew, and Jews who can do learn medicine, because let's put it this way: it's the only thing you can learn in college you could do something with in the Middle Ages. Maybe today also, but in the Middle Ages, there were no 4 years of medical school like we have today, and autopsies and all the kind of pathology work that they do nowadays. But they had their system in the Middle Ages. In other words, I wouldn't advise you to go to any of these doctors today. But having said that, They were renowned physicians in their day, and the person who was the doctor of the Caliph of Abdurrahman was a Jewish guy, Chazdai ben Shaprut, who came from a very wealthy family. The wealthy families are the ones who give their kids this kind of education because the idea was the following. If you have your medical knowledge, then even if you get kicked out of the country, you can always take it with you. If you make your money and in goods and in business, if they kick you out of the country, you're broke. You know, that was the old Jewish way of thinking. It happened many times that people build up huge fortunes, and then came a pogrom or some other untoward or unexplained incident, and then what do? You know, you can't take it with you. You got to get on the next plane, on the next boat. But if you got it up here, then wherever you land, people always need a good doctor. That was the theory behind it. So Chazdai ben Shaprut became a physician. He was very wealthy. He was the Caliph's physician. And in addition to that, he got it real tight with him, sort of like Kissinger did with Nixon, the same kind of relationship. So that he became a national security advisor. Because you know how it goes. First you ask your doctor, how's my arm feeling, all the rest of it. And then the next thing you say is, and what do you think about the stock market? And the third thing you think is, and what do you think we should do with the Russians? You know? This is what happened with the Caliph Abdurrahman, who was very intelligent. He was an Arab, he was a Muslim. As Muslims, they look down on all Jews, they look down on all Christians. That's who they are. You know, don't fool yourself. This is not a matter of tolerance. But he was an intelligent guy. He was a smart guy. He was too smart to say that because this guy is Jewish, he doesn't know anything. The opposite is, I'm going to make him work for me. Now, this is all done behind doors because the Arabs can't stand to see a Jew having an official position in the government. Can't be Secretary of State. You can only be National Security Advisor. You see? And nevertheless, this Jew got in there, and he became very influential. And little by little, the Caliph put him in charge of the customs. You know what I mean? The customs duty thing, which means he shipped a lot of Jews in the different ports and places like that. And eventually, he got him to handle the foreign treaties because if there were to be a doctor, you have to know Greek and Latin, and these are the languages of Europe. The Arabs don't know this sort of thing. It's beneath their dignity to learn for other languages. And next thing you know, this guy's very, very influential. And he remained so, this is the remarkable thing, until the death of the Caliph and even afterwards. Usually in the Arab countries, whoever is up today gets his head chopped off tomorrow or the day after, because these things come and go. This guy knew how to, the Arab mentality, how to get along and dance on eggs. I can tell you one very brief story which illustrates the utility of the Jew, and as I say before, how the Jew's existence in Spain hangs on a string. And that is a manuscript that was discovered 150 years ago in a monastery in Austria by John of Gortz, who was a very famous Catholic priest and bishop, actually, and once upon a time a political figure in this period with the Holy Roman Empire. Give me the map of Europe. There we go. If you see on the lower left-hand side is Spain. I hope you can see that on the lower left-hand side. That's Spain, but this whole area is the Holy Roman Empire. So it's big. It's Germany and northern Italy and a chunk of France. Okay, these were two of the big countries at that time. This is actually a little bit later, in the time I'm talking about, the Arabs ruled more. But the point is, there are two countries near each other. Well, Arab pirates raided this area. That's what Arab pirates do. And the Holy Roman Emperor didn't like this, and he sent complaints to the Caliph in Cordoba. Well, the Caliph in Cordoba, Abdurrahman being a very proud Arab, he sent back a letter to the Holy Emperor saying, we'll do whatever we want, and not only that, your religion sucks. He said all kind of demeaning expressions about significant figures in their Christian religion. So, Holy Empire, not to be outdone, he sent a letter down here with, down here with counter expressions that, no, this is what I think of Muhammad. Well, the Arabs don't like that. They don't like that even today. I can criticize you, but you can't criticize me. You know that. What happened last year when the guy made a cartoon of Muhammad, the whole nuts? So, same thing at that time. And he even said, I'm looking for someone who's going to carry this letter to them, and you're going to be a carbon because they're going to kill you. You know that. And this guy, Johann of Gortz, who was an eminent churchman, he said, I'm going to do it, l'shem shamayim, as they say, Some of these guys showed them off. And he had a whole mission, which he described in great detail. They only found this 150 years ago, when he went down over here towards his goal. When he got around here, early in the kingdom, he said he was met by, and this is a mission, a diplomatic mission, an embassy from the Holy Roman Emperor. No, it's from the German Emperor, who was a great world power. like you say today, the Russian ambassador, and these Arab guys, the guards, the soldiers, come and they say, please come with us. They treat him very nicely, but they say, you have to come with us. And they take him to a villa nearby where they wait on head and foot, but they say, you be our guest, and they can't move. And he said, I've got orders to take this to the Caliph of Kura. Can't move. He waits like a few days, and this is what he writes. And then this Jew shows up, Chaz ibn Shaprut. And he said like this, look, I'm a Jew, I work for the Caliph, so show me the letter. He says, I'm going to strict orders, only to show the letter to the Caliph himself. Show me the letter. He said, I can't do it, it's against my instructions. Look, I don't want to make any trouble over here. I'm trying to help you guys out. If you show them, you got to show me the letter. If it says things, let's play chess. You're going to go there. You're going to show him the letter. He's going to freak out. He's going to have no choice but to kill you. Meanwhile, the Christians will rise. He'll have to kill a lot of Christians in the kingdom also. Burn down all the churches. You'll have a huge war. Show me the letter. You see? The guy says, absolutely not. I'm going to these instructions. So he spent 21 days hacking with this guy over and over again. Chaz ibn Shaprut. He got to know him. He buddied up to him, and and keeps saying, "Show me the letter." And the end of the story is, of course, that he tried to explain to him how it's in the mutual benefit of both sides not to use this particular letter, and eventually persuaded him, even though we're dealing with a medieval monk, to send it back and get another copy of the letter, with the bad expressions removed. You understand? And he says, you leave it to me. You get a nice letter. And not only will I get you a good reception, I'll get you a good trade treaty. I'll make it worth your while. And that's what happened. And eventually he came down there, and we showed him the new letter. He came to Cordoba. There he had a huge reception in this splendid palace, and everybody kissed each other. Everything was wonderful. And they promised to stop the piracy. He stopped this. Everything was gewaldic, and everybody was happy. And the cause of peace was advanced. And Johann of Gortz says, as he's finishing this thing, he says, I never met a smart person like this Jew. You understand? Now, wait a second. What is his smarts? His smarts was, and to put it bluntly, the Jew in Spain in the Middle Ages will succeed if he's able to interpret one set of goyim to the other. You have no value in and of yourself. Your value lies in your ability to be of service to both sides of the other, both of whom hate you. Right? The only way they'll admire is if, he did service to me. Understand this well. This is the position of Jews in Spain. But what is what does Chazak care? He said, okay, I'll take it in 20s. He'll that's what it is. And so this is how a Jew rises to influence and power in this kind of cutthroat world. Seeking to imitate the Caliph. He said he did something very, very interesting and set a trend. The Caliph is out to patronize and build up his reign, patronize art and artists. Well, they're all Arabic. Arabic is the ruling language. The Arabs, by the way, are in love with their language, deservedly so, and the grammar and the writings of the Quran and the great poets and all that sort of thing. So many Jews, under this influence, also study Arabic, the same way that there are plenty of Jews today, even including religious ones, who might have a PhD in English literature because they're interested in it. I'll give you an example. What's the name of Rabbi Soloveitch's son-in-law? Rabbi Lichtenstein, PhD in English literature. But, exactly. So you can have that. However, that's not what Chaz ibn Shaprut does. He says like this, I want to do what they're doing, Jewish. And so they're interested in the Arabic language. I want to have someone interested in the Hebrew language. They're interested in the Arabic grammar and all the ins and outs of it. I want somebody doing it in Ivrit. They're interested in creating, and they do create, an incredibly impressive array of Arabic poetry. I want to see it in Hebrew. You understand? Notice he takes whatever they did and channels it in a Jewish direction to fructify and to enhance Jewish culture. And he launches a trend which sweeps Jewish Spain for the rest of the 900s and the 1000s and early into the early 1100s. This is what the historians call the golden age of the Jews in Spain. They mean this specific period. As a result of his money. In other words, it's money. You understand? If you have people who are well-to-do, who are willing to pay somebody to sit and write dictionaries, to write poetry, to explore diktuk, to have battles, as they will have, between Shvano and Shvanach, I kid you not, Dogish Chazak, Dogish Kal, to throw themselves into interstices of the Hebrew language, because we Jews know that the Hebrew language is the really holy language. The Arabic language, can't say it, but that's how it is. This is what triggers a pride and a rise of interest among Judaism, among Jews, and this is the best they can do in the Middle Ages. Okay? And so Spain, starting at this time, under patronage of people like Chazdim and Shabrut, and others who will imitate him, becomes the place, in fact, just about the only place, in which a Jewish intellectual who wants to go into Jewish stuff and write books in Hebrew on Jewish themes, or actually they often write in Arabic, but on Jewish themes. They dictate books that are very famous. This is funny, written in Arabic. Because that's the language they're familiar with, like you and I know English. They do this in this context, that they're imitating what the others do, but they do it in their own way. What I'm describing, therefore, is a Haskalah. But it's not like the Haskalah of the 19th century. Everybody hears Shomer Shabbos. But it was a Haskalah, meaning that there was this attempt to create a Jewish culture that's not just Gemara. And they did do it. Notice they produced a galaxy of intellectuals and artists and writers, not physical art, but in the literary arts, which define the 9 and 1000s in Spain as a special time in Jewish history. Even though it doesn't mean everything was great, I just told you, even the top guy over there has to dance on eggs and explain one side to the other. That's how he gets along. But in his off time, he was able to have his own banquets and have his own mathematicians and his own philosophers and so on and so forth. Now that does not mean, right? Now with this I'll conclude, that does not mean that they neglect the Gemara either. Quite the contrary. At this very time that I'm talking about, in the middle of the 900s, 950s or so, when Chazdim and Shabrut is the head of the Jewish community and Abdurrahman is the caliph, a very famous incident happens. The incident is legendary to some degree or another, but the fundamental facts behind it are clearly true. And this is the famous legend of the 4 captives. I'll tell you later next week why it's a legend, but it goes like this: that there was, I told you, Abdurrahman, and remember this map is 100 years later. The borders of Spain, most of it was still under the Muslims at the time I'm talking about. So the caliph sent out pirate ships, fleets. In fact, in the Sefer Kabbalah from the Ravid, he talks about how the fleet invaded here and things like that, all over the place. And it's piracy, basically, but it was legal. The Arabs have been pirates from day one, and they maintained a heavy piracy until the Europeans took them over in the 1800s. And as you know now, in Somalia and all that, back to the old tricks. It's not going. This is who the. So the fact is that in this period, everybody was doing piracy, and so Ibn Rumachis was the admiral of the Caliph Abdurrahman. He raged far and wide over the Mediterranean, capturing and sacking all kind of ships. The piracy is a business. I've said it here more than once. I'm sure some of you heard it. Piracy is a business. You don't go for fun. You go for to make money. So you capture a ship, and what they always used to do is like this. You take all the goods, and then all the people you line up in the 2 rows, A and B. A is the group that will find somebody to pay, and B isn't. I'll give you an example. Here's a Rockefeller. Oh, you're not going to kill him. That's why would you kill that? You ransom him off. Now, who's this? This is Rockefeller's butler over the side. No hard feelings. What are we going to do with him? Well, yeah, just an out of the mouth to feed. Not going to bring anything. Now, Jews always put in the left side, because we Jews have a very strong tradition going back forever of Pidyon Shvuyim. It's one of the main Jewish mitzvahs. You know that. Helping redeem captives. When Jews are in trouble, other Jews go to help them out. You see? Look, I'll tell you something. When they got the Jews out of Ethiopia 20 years ago, so this group did this and that group did that, and then Israel sent a general, to go to the dictator in Ethiopia with 2 suitcases. And suitcases were full of $100 bills, $1,000 bills. They gave them $32 million as a cash in. But we do it. How much did Israel pay Russia? How much did Israel pay Romania? I don't know if you know this. Huge sums. But do we regret it? I mean, I would rather not get ripped off, but do we regret it? You say like this: I'll do what I have to do to get a Jew out of trouble. This is a basic. So this was a davar pashut. This was obvious in the Middle Ages. So piracy is a fact of life. Therefore, every Jewish community, all throughout the Mediterranean and elsewhere, every Jewish community were located in the ports, because there's always Jews in the ports. That's where business is made. Wherever they have port cities, there's a Jewish community, and one of the things the Jewish community does is have a Pinyan Shvuyim fund. Now, money isn't endless. You have a budgetary process a year. The Jewish community raises so and so much money for its various needs, sort of something along the lines of like the Associated does now, and you have to budget it out, and so much money is allotted for Pinyan Shvuyim. Otherwise, anyway, the pirates would charge too much money. And so this admiral captured these guys, and it's very famous that one of them, Moshe Mechanoch, his wife, was taken there and they were going to rape her, and she asked her husband in Hebrew if she commits suicide, will she have Olam Haba? And he said yes, and she jumped over the ship and drowned herself. This is one of those famous stories that are part of this. And but the rabbis who were captured were simply, when they landed here in Alexandria, they sold one. When they landed here in Cairo, they sold another. And we don't know what happened to the third, but when they landed in Cordoba, they sold the fourth, him and his son. And that's how it went. In other words, the Jewish community in Alexandria didn't have endless funds. They had enough to pay for one captive at that time. They probably had a category, people from 20 to 50. I think that's how they used to do it. And younger people, how many for a girl, how many for a boy, and all the rest of it. So this one got landed here, and that one got landed there. And that's how they did it. They were smart enough not to say that they're rabbis, because that's who they were. They're big Rosh Hashivas. So only an idiot will say like this, my name is Aaron Kala, I'm the head of Lakewood, you know what I mean? Doesn't charge $1 zillion. Get it? You just look like a schlep. That's the way to go. And so this guy got sold for a relatively minor amount in Alexandria, and that one got sold for a relatively minor amount over here, and the third one over a relatively minor amount over there. So only after it was over there, he came out of the closet and said, he's Rabbi Cutler. You see? So this is called the legend of the four captives, because it is a fact from their time on. This one founded a big yeshiva here, this one founded a big yeshiva here, and this one founded a big yeshiva here in Cordoba. Okay? Now they started a new era of Torah learning, exactly like in our time. The Yiddishkeit was in a state of decadence. They were religious Jews. I won't say it's like America where people Machal Shabbos. They kept the basic, but they didn't know much. And when these people came, they brought a level of scholarship with them that could help Talmudize everything. So Kairouan, in the middle, Tunisia became a big Makom Torah after this, and Spain did, because what happened was, and this is in the Sefer Gabal written at that time, the Caliph was happy that they found this rabbi. The admiral charged that he'd been Jewed down. This is what he said. That he didn't know who it was, and they bought him for a song, and he wants more money. And Chazdi ben Shur got to the Caliph, obviously, and the Caliph said, leave these guys alone, because it comes to my benefit. Why does it come to my benefit? He said, this guy's going to start a yeshiva here, then the Jews will no longer send all their money, their shilohs, all the way over here to Baghdad. The money goes out of the country. This way, others will come and send shilohs and shuvas and money here. Be better for my economy. Yeah. Now, I know the Caliph didn't think that on his own, but the Jewish guy gave him the idea. The fact of the matter is, makes sense. The fact of the matter is that from this incident, this captive who landed in Cordoba, named Moshe ben Chanoch, was a big Rosh Yeshiva. Nobody knows exactly where he came from. He knew the Talmud Bavli cold. And it's a very famous story that's told, similar to the Hillel and the B'nai B'Sever story, that after he was a captive, he got off the boat, he walked to the near synagogue, and somebody was giving a shiur to the local rabbi there. And the local rabbi, like I said before, they had Dayanim, they had Rabbanim, but they were Amaratzim. That's what it was. You do the best you can. Tonight, that time's out, so I'll try to explain next week why that was the case. They were cut off from Babylonian places like that. But they did the best they could. And so he was trying to explain some Gemara, the famous story goes, and he says, I don't understand this myself. I'll be honest with you. And then this guy walked over to him afterwards, not in public to embarrass him. He said, here's the shot in the Gemara, this and this and this. And he asked him a couple more questions, he knew it. And he said, guys, I'm out of here. This is this, and he's the new rabbi, which is very unusual. They would give away to someone else. But it did happen. And as a result, he founded a great yeshiva, and Cordoba became a big Makom Torah, and Spain, therefore, not only became a place of Jewish culture, but it became a place of very, very significant Talmudic study and Torah learning, which means it became Iker Makom Torah, and here was founded what we call the Sephardic tradition. Because otherwise, this would just be a little story. But from Spain comes one of the two fundamental Jewish Torah traditions that last down till today, the Ashkenaz and the Sfard. Where does it come from? Not from the Jews who were there before this. They didn't know anything. They were mostly immigrants, and the children and the grandchildren. Immigrants were trying to make a buck, trying to put bread on the table. Now is when it starts that Spain will become a place which generates its own Talmidei Chacham, its own unique form of scholarship, and that will make the Spanish Jewish community not simply the largest and perhaps even the wealthiest Jewish community in the world, but also the most advanced in terms of Torah and Talmudic culture, which means that it will survive even after 1492 and does so until today. The hour is late, so we carried the story forward this much, and I'll try to pick up next week. Are there any questions, very briefly?
How come there was no immigration of the leadership of Babel?
How come no Rosh Yeshivas moved to America before the Second World War? There's your answer. You have a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I know I came in a little bit late, but when you're saying all the Jews moved to Spain and they descended upon Spain because of the wealth and the potential for
The economy.
Where did they come from?
All over the place. I mean, literally, from Africa, from Eretz Yisrael, from Babylonia, even from Greece, from Italy. They poured it from all over the place. It's the same question if you ask me, where did Jews move to? Where are they coming to America from? Mm-hmm. The answer is everywhere. Right? Why? Because of the economy. Right? One more question, then we're done.
At the time of this renaissance of learning...
I don't want to say renaissance, it's naissance.
Renaissance, okay. Did any of this spill over the Pyrenees into France?
No.
No, it didn't.
No, the French had their own development, which was unique and on their own. And Od Chazon, that's for another time. I'm serious. That's another story. That's Ashkenaz, what you're talking about. At the time I'm talking about, there were two independent developments. It's very interesting how it happened, but that is how it happened. And because there are two independent developments, there are two independent groups until today.